And please, one day, may we all be there in Stormont for the reconvening of the Assembly and have a most enjoyable time. And if I'm still a member of this House, I will enjoy that as my swan song. If I'm not a member of this House, then I'm going to crash your party anyway. Thank you very much.
Minister John Penrose.
Amen to that, Mr. Speaker, I think is the only way to follow that one. Can I start by saying it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman from Ealing North. It is perhaps not his swan song here. I think in theory he's got another couple of years before the end of this Parliament, should we run the full term. But nonetheless, he's been a wonderful adornment, one of the funniest members of Parliament here for a long time. Both he and the member for Vauxhall, who we've also heard tributes to as a member of the Northern Ireland Select Committee, and in fact temporary chair while my honourable friend was being selected and elevated to his place. Good to see him incidentally in his first legislative outing in that place, making a contribution today. But it will be sad to see the honourable gentleman from Ealing North go, and we can see, I think, from his comments today just why that will be so. Mr. Speaker, this is it's a very short bill. It's only 3 or 4 clauses long. It's a very simple extension of 2 dates, and that is actually all it does. It hasn't stopped us from going on at quite some length about Brexit and about hard borders or not hard borders in Northern Ireland, all sorts of other related matters, but at its heart, it does something very, very simple indeed. It just extends the existing EFEF Act 2 dates, one the initial period, and then potentially, at Parliament's discretion, a potential further short extension. And it's good, Mr. Speaker, to know that Speaker after Speaker, party after party, as we have been undertaking this debate during the course of this afternoon, has expressed their support for this bill. And I would like to put the government's thanks on record to everybody for their support right the way across the aisle. It does matter, particularly when it comes to Northern Ireland, that we have cross-party support and ideally cross-community support as well. But, Mr. Speaker, it is not unqualified or open-ended support either. As the honourable gentleman for Ealing North said, and many others said during the course of the afternoon, this is something which is, frankly, wearing thin. This is something which we have been here before, and there is both frustration and, I think, a great deal of concern about the missed opportunities on all sorts of areas in Northern Ireland, on health, on education, on suicide prevention. We've even heard about missed opportunities on potholes right the way across Northern Ireland, things that are not being done, decisions that are not being taken, and as many different contributions said during the course of the evening, this cannot continue for very much longer indeed. In fact, I think the right honourable gentleman from Belfast North described it as the end game, and I think he was absolutely right. I will briefly give way.
I'm very grateful indeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Minister for allowing me to intervene with him. I shall just repeat to him the phrase he's just used, and that is wearing thin. I can assure the Minister of State and the Secretary of State that what is wearing thin is the patience of the people in Northern Ireland with the fact we do not have a functioning assembly, and added to that and intensified annoyance with the fact that MLAs continue to be paid. So will the Minister of State commit this evening that if the Assembly is not functioning again when we look at these dates in this bill, that the Secretary of State will use her powers to cut the salaries of the MLAs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would agree with the first half of her sentence absolutely, which is that the sense of frustration, the sense of concern, is not just confined to these benches on all sides of the aisle here this afternoon and this evening, although it has been very, very palpable. It also extends right the way across all communities in Northern Ireland. She's absolutely right to make that point. I would also, in relation to the pay of MLAs, I would just gently remind her that, in fact, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has already cut the pay of MLAs, not once but twice. I think they're now down 27.5% from their initial level. And that doesn't mean to say that further cuts might not be possible. I'm sure that my honourable friend will have, sitting in her place, will have heard what the honourable lady has got to say, and I'm sure she'll consider it carefully. I'm afraid I can't give her any stronger commitment than that, but I think she's made her point. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, that the concern and the frustration, which I mentioned before, was palpable from speaker after speaker during the course of this debate. And also, and again a point which was made in his summing up by the honourable gentleman from Ealing North, that fear and that frustration and concern was also twinned with a fear of the erosion of faith in the Stormont Assembly and in the Stormont Executive and in devolved government and democracy in Northern Ireland. And underlying everything that we have been saying is a worry that if the democratic institutions in Northern Ireland are not working effectively, then a peaceful opportunity to give vent to give effect to differences of opinion and to make collective decisions in Northern Ireland is lost. And if that opportunity is not taken, if those opportunities are lost, then it lends help, it lends succour, it lends energy to those who say, well, democracy is not the answer in Northern Ireland and other forms of expression are. And we all know where that can lead and where that has led in Northern Ireland's tragic history in the past, and we do not want to go there again. So it's very, very good to hear people saying that on both sides of the aisle, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for giving way. Could I ask the Secretary of State and the Minister, is there the slightest scintilla, the slightest glint that Sinn Féin will actually come to some agreement in the next 3 months? Or are we just hoping they might come to some sort of compromise?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises a very important point, which is at the moment, the talks are still ongoing. There is still breath, there is still life left in the negotiating room. And again, I think it is worthwhile just recording that everybody here, in different ways, at different points during the course of the afternoon and evening's debate, has made the point that they want those talks to succeed. And it isn't just confined to one side of the talks or the other. Everybody is still in the room, and it is absolutely essential that while there is still hope, while there is still breath left in those talks, that they must continue, because the alternative is far, far worse. So that is the only really legitimate reason for any kind of extension to the EF Act. That's the only legitimate reason for extending this Act, which is that there is still a glimmer of hope that this can be done. And I think it will give nobody greater pleasure than my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, for this Act to be one which never actually needed to come into force. I think she mentioned in her opening remarks, she would be delighted if this Act never needed royal assent because it was unnecessary, because the talks had succeeded, because devolved government had been reinstated in Northern Ireland. And I think that nobody, with the possible exception of, again, my honourable friend from Ealing North, who I think has promised to crash the party in the event that this happened, but nobody apart from him would be happier at that, at the success of the talks, than my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who has been basically locked in a series of meeting rooms in and around Stormont for the last several months now, seeing very little of her family in an attempt to get the thing to work. So I'm sure we all wish her well. Mr. Speaker, just very briefly, there were two main types of contribution to this debate. One group were colleagues who were prefiguring amendments which they have tabled for tomorrow and which they hope to catch your eye and debate. Those included my honourable friend from Congleton, the honourable gentleman from St Helens North, the honourable lady from Walthamstow, amongst others, all of whom, often from very different sides of the same issue, want to make sure that alternative broader issues around the governance of Northern Ireland can be raised and can be debated tomorrow in an attempt to move issues which are dear to their hearts forward. The second group of types of contribution, if I can put it that way, were much broader and much more numerous, which were people who are saying, look, it is not wrong, but it is sad that this bill is having to be used as a vehicle for these kinds of issues at all, because it would be far better if Northern Ireland were being properly served by a Stormont Assembly, and at that point the Stormont Assembly could not only deal with the issues which are down for amendments to be discussed tomorrow in the committee stage, but also could deal with many of the other issues which were raised in many cases by members from Northern Ireland constituencies themselves, but more broadly as well, which are much, much broader than, if I can put it, cultural issues. They are to do with health, they are to do with education, they are to do with potholes and everything else. The more mundane but absolutely essential warp and weft of government and keeping the good governance of Northern Ireland up to date in a way which, because decisions have only been taken in a very, very limited way under the existing powers, under the EFEF Act, has meant that Northern Ireland's public services have gently but steadily become more and more out of date because decisions have not been able to be taken, and as a result they are in many cases less efficient than they would otherwise be if they'd been kept up to date. In many cases they are more expensive and less productive in the way that they are delivered than they would otherwise be, and that, Mr. Speaker, was the broader thrust of many, many other people's contributions. Everyone, and from my honourable friend from Lewis, who a member of the Select Committee, gave a broad tour d'horizon, giving 3 different options, which we must all consider, and I will happily pick up with her when I have a little bit more time about how we could take it forward, through to honourable gentlemen from Paisley and North Renfrewshire, Belfast North we've already heard of, plus a whole slew of other Northern Ireland representing colleagues from North Antrim, from Strangford, from Belfast East, and on and on. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that the one thing I can promise is that this is not being rushed. We do have 2 full days of debate, today and tomorrow, and then on to 3 days in the Lords as well. So there will be opportunities, and plenty of opportunity to debate this in more depth. But I will happily give way. I think I know what he may be about to ask me, but I will.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. I think I heard the Minister say the member for Belfast East goes on and on and on. But he knows the issue. He knows the issue that I want to raise. It's specific, it's discreet about co-ownership. The bill is ready, and I understand the bill rests with Treasury. Has he got good news?
Mr. Speaker, I did not say that the member for Belfast goes on and on and on at all, and nor would I ever do so. I'm afraid he is right to remind me of the pledge which I was able to make from this dispatch box month and a half, 2 months ago, something like that. I'm afraid I don't have a date for him, but he is right to say that a date for introduction of the bill, but he is right to say that the bill has moved forward dramatically. It is now in the necessary format for Westminster introduction. We don't have a date yet, but he is also right to say that Treasury has a very strong interest in moving this thing forward, because it is to their financial advantage to get this change done, and therefore where Treasury wishes to lean, that is always a good place for any minister to begin. So that, with that, Mr. Speaker, I will draw my remarks to a close. We have an entire day of this tomorrow, debating the various different amendments which had been prefigured during the course of this afternoon and this evening's debate. But just to finish, to say once again thank you to all sides and all concerned for their broad support in principle for this bill.
Thank you. Order. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Committee what day?